This isn't a story about glory, it's a story about duty, the kind that whispers in the dark corners where institutions fail. You've seen the news reports, read the warnings, and you know the name, the Sentinels MC. They are the shadows on the highways, the heavy leather, the loud pipes, the patches that signify a life lived outside the acceptable lines. They are called outlaws. They are feared, and that fear, often fueled by sensationalism, is exactly what keeps them isolated, misunderstood, and sometimes the perfect necessary force when the world needs a rough hand to right a profound wrong. In the sleepy suburb of Meadowbrook, a place known for its manicured lawns and forced smiles, the true violence wasn't visible from the street. It was hidden behind a closed door in a house that looked exactly like all the others. Our protagonist is Ethan, a 10-year-old boy with a shock of brown hair and eyes that held too much worry for his age. Ethan was trapped in a nightmare created by his stepfather, Dale. Dale wasn't a monster in the classic sense. He was a manipulator, a psychological tyrant whose rage often turned physical against Ethan's mother, Sarah. The bruises were usually hidden beneath long sleeves, the arguments muffled by thick walls, and the constant tension was disguised as ordinary family friction. Sarah, beaten down by years of emotional abuse, was too terrified and ashamed to leave. She was isolated, convinced that reporting Dale would only make things worse, a cycle of fear that the abuser meticulously cultivates. Ethan watched it all, feeling the immense, crushing weight of helplessness. His school counselors offered platitudes. The police, called once by a nervous neighbor, filed a vague report and left, bound by the thin evidence and Sarah's terrified denial. No one saw the real threat. No one was coming to save them. The Sentinels MC rarely rolled through Meadowbrook. Their territory was the industrial edge of the city, the open roads, and the desolate places where people preferred not to look. But fate, or perhaps a long-forgotten kindness, intervened. One Saturday, Ethan was walking home from the corner store, his small arms struggling with a bag of groceries. A heavy-set man on a gleaming black Harley-Davidson pulled up beside him. This was Grit, a Sentinel veteran, known within the club for his silent intensity and his surprisingly gentle demeanor with those he deemed innocent. Grit was waiting for a mechanic friend who ran a small shop down the block. Ethan, normally shy, was overwhelmed and distraught after witnessing a particularly vicious argument the night before. His mother had cried herself to sleep. The sight of Grit, large and unyielding, was the opposite of the weakness Ethan saw in his daily life. Driven by a desperate, childish courage, Ethan stopped, dropped his groceries, and blurted out the truth, the words spilling out like a torrent he couldn't stop. He didn't even know who Grit was. The words hung in the air, piercing the afternoon quiet. "Mister, I gotta tell you something. My stepfather hurts my mom every night. He's gonna hurt her bad. Can you do something?" Grit's expression didn't change immediately, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto Ethan's terrified face. Grit wasn't accustomed to being approached for such domestic pleas. The Sentinels' code was strict. They didn't involve themselves in civilian issues unless it threatened the club or those under their direct protection. But something in the boy's plea, the naked, desperate hope, resonated deep within Grit's own past. He calmly helped Ethan pick up the groceries, then gently told him to go home and act normal. He promised nothing, but the intensity of his gaze was a commitment Ethan understood instinctively. Grit brought the story back to the Sentinel clubhouse. The club president, Hammer, a pragmatic leader with a deep sense of justice rooted in his military background, listened carefully. The VPs, the sergeants-at-arms, they all listened. They were men hardened by life, intimately familiar with injustice. They knew that when the legal system moved slowly or failed completely, the vulnerable are the ones who pay the price. And to the Sentinels, protecting a child was a non-negotiable directive. "We ain't police," Hammer stated, his voice flat. "But this is about a kid and a woman who can't fight back. The law won't move until it's too late. We move now." The plan was swift, meticulous, and covert. They couldn't use force. That would confirm every public stereotype about them and destroy Sarah's case. They had to be the unseen catalyst, the silent, heavy hand of consequence. Hammer assigned 3 trusted members, Grit, Viper, and Doc, the club's resident computer and information expert, to conduct a thorough background check on Dale. Within 48 hours, Doc uncovered Dale's hidden life, a history of prior restraining orders in another state, a severe gambling debt, and crucially, a violation of parole he had managed to keep hidden. He was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The Sentinels didn't need to break the law. They simply needed to expose the villain to the authorities who had overlooked him, while ensuring Sarah and Ethan's immediate safety. They gathered the concrete evidence the police required, but couldn't obtain. Digital footprints, witness statements from the previous state, and a clear timeline of the hidden parole violations. This was the proof that would ensure Dale's immediate arrest and removal, keeping Sarah from having to face him alone in court. The Sentinels were ready to ride into Meadowbrook, not with weapons, but with overwhelming, undeniable truth. They were preparing to execute a rescue operation defined by precision and silent, overwhelming presence. Their goal was simple: get the mother and son out safely before Dale's house of cards collapsed and his rage turned lethal. The Sentinels MC was ready to move. Their mission, codenamed Guardian Angel, was set for Tuesday evening, right as the suburban quiet settled in. But before true darkness fell, a time of maximum psychological impact with minimum visibility. They weren't coming in loud, yet their presence needed to be unmistakable. Hammer understood that their reputation, the very thing that made them outlaws, was their most potent weapon. They wouldn't touch Dale, but they would make it terrifyingly clear what would happen if he ever touched Sarah or Ethan again. The goal was definitive deterrence, not just temporary removal. Doc had secured a temporary anonymous safe house 2 states over, managed by a network of retired law enforcement officers who secretly appreciated the Sentinels' brand of frontier justice. Grit had quietly contacted Sarah's only known family member, a distant aunt in that other state, preparing her for Sarah and Ethan's arrival. The final piece was timing. Dale was scheduled to be at his weekly poker game, a perfect window of opportunity. However, at 4:30 p.m., Viper received a frantic, coded text from Ethan, who was borrowing a hidden phone from a friend. He's home early, drinking. Everything is loud. The window had slammed shut. The situation had just escalated from a planned extraction to an urgent, dangerous rescue. Hammer made the executive decision. The plan was on, but now with a necessary element of controlled psychological shock and awe. This was no longer just about removing Sarah and Ethan. It was about ensuring Dale was too preoccupied and too terrified to react violently during the extraction. Grit, Viper, and 4 other trusted Vipers, all ex-military and experts in rapid deployment, sped towards Meadowbrook. They were riding in their usual formation, the thunder of their engines echoing across the quiet, tree-lined streets, a sound totally foreign and utterly alarming to the neighborhood. When they arrived at the street, they parked their bikes in a precise, intimidating semicircle right in front of Dale's house. The roar of the engines cut out simultaneously, leaving a deafening, cold silence. The sight was startling. 6 massive bikers, wearing full patches, standing like statues in front of a perfectly ordinary white picket fence. They looked less like visitors and more like the inevitable arrival of judgment. Neighbors peered through curtains, terrified to intervene but unable to look away. This visual spectacle was the first layer of the defense. Viper and 2 other members stayed with the bikes, their arms crossed, silent, their eyes scanning the windows, projecting an overwhelming, unwavering threat of stability and control. Grit and Hammer approached the front door. They didn't knock. Hammer simply used a controlled, heavy kick, shattering the lock and forcing the door inward with a dramatic crash that instantly stopped the noise inside. The scene inside was chaos. Dale, halfway through a beer, was yelling at a visibly shaking Sarah who was trying to shield Ethan. The moment Dale saw Hammer and Grit, 2 giants filling his doorway, their faces obscured by the shadows and their demeanors radiating lethal calm, His abusive rage instantly dissolved into pure, paralyzing fear. He didn't see bikers. He saw the living manifestation of every mistake he had ever made, finally catching up to him. The sight of the Sentinels MC, the names from the darkest highway legends, standing in his pristine living room, was the ultimate psychological break. Hammer never raised his voice, never moved aggressively. He simply stood, radiating cold authority. "You finish packing, Sarah," he stated, his voice a low, heavy rumble that brooked no argument. "Ethan, go help your mother, 5 minutes." He then turned his full, terrifying attention to Dale. "The party's over, Dale. We know about your history. We know about the parole. We know everything. We have documented everything you've done to Sarah and Ethan. It's all with the authorities now. If you so much as twitch toward that boy or that woman, we will not need the law to find you. Do you understand?" Dale was hyperventilating, his face pale and slick with fear, the beer slipping from his hands. He was a coward who preyed on the weak, and now he was facing men who understood true force, men who were demonstrably not afraid of consequences. He could only nod, a pathetic whimper escaping his lips, while Ethan, now visibly emboldened, rushed to grab the small duffel bags they had prepared. Sarah moved like a ghost, snatching only the essential papers Doc had advised her to keep safe. The Sentinels didn't touch her or Ethan, keeping a respectful distance, treating them not as victims, but as protected individuals. 5 minutes later, Sarah and Ethan were being escorted out the shattered doorway. Ethan looked back at Hammer and offered a small, sincere nod. Hammer returned it, a rare, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. The group moved swiftly and silently to a waiting, unmarked car, driven by Doc's contact, parked discreetly down the block, ensuring the bikers were never seen interacting with the escape vehicle. As the car sped away, Hammer and Grit exchanged one last, penetrating look with Dale, who was still standing in the wreckage of his living room, frozen by fear. The message was clear. This was not a warning. This was the end of his life of impunity. The Sentinels mounted their bikes, and the thunder of the engines returned, the sound now carrying the triumph of justice, fading quickly into the distance. The neighbors came out of their houses, buzzing with confusion and fear, but the threat was gone. Later that night, the local police, prompted by the anonymous package of evidence filed by the Sentinels, arrived at Dale's house. He was arrested immediately for parole violation, and with Sarah and Ethan safely out of state, an order of protection was instantly filed. No one saw the bikers, no one had definitive proof of their involvement, but the result was undeniable. An innocent mother and her son were safe, rescued by the very men society had dismissed as criminals. The Sentinels MC rode on, leaving behind only the memory of thunder and the profound, life-saving difference between being an outlaw and being a truly good man.